Well, what do we have here? BYU coaches have been adamant all week long that LJ Martin could be available against Southern Illinois in game one for the BYU football program, despite rumors to the contrary. Based on some social media posts overnight, that very well might be the case. How big of an impact could that be for BYU? Let's discuss it.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, your resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you who are everydayers with us right here on your original daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. All right, everybody. BYU releases information in an interesting way when it comes to sports information. Now, I'm not saying it's nefarious. I'm not saying it's targeted. I'm not saying it's meant to craft a narrative. I'm not saying anything other than the fact that last night, if you watched Instagram Live, BYU put out some practice highlights. And in the midst of those, there happened to be some running back wearing the number 27 running up the field for the BYU football program in team drills. Oh, those of you who know your roster know that number 27 on the BYU football roster is one LJ Martin. Okay, this is interesting. Well, I was perusing BYU's photo site last night, and then this curious photo popped up. Those of you watching this on YouTube are going to be able to see it. That right there is LJ Martin in full pads in a team drill carrying the football. What does this mean for the BYU football program? This means the BYU coaches maybe, just maybe, for the first time in quite a long time, weren't quote-unquote BSing us in the media when it said they believed that LJ Martin be ready to go for this season. Now, LJ made some headlines when he came on my podcast, and we talked earlier this summer, and I asked him about his injury status. He says he wasn't sure where it was coming from. I had it on very good authority that he was dealing with a shoulder injury at that time. If he is feeling 100%, and BYU, I'll be very clear about this, would not be practicing LJ if he wasn't 100% healthy. That is not the way that BYU operates. In fact, BYU more often than not errs on the side of caution more so than many programs out there nationally. They will always think of the athlete first and foremost in terms of throwing them back out there when they could potentially re-injure themselves. So, to see LJ Martin in photos and videos yesterday, I'm not saying it's a conspiracy theory. I'm not saying it's something that BYU is trying to craft a narrative. But the good news is, if you're a Cougar fan, it appears that the coaches, Roderick and Kalani Sitake among them, who said that LJ Martin could be available for game one, and they hope that he would be available and should be available, might be right about that. Now, we still have 18 days until BYU kicks it off against Southern Illinois out there at Lavelle Edwards Stadium. By the way, Southern Illinois ranked 11th in the preseason FCS poll. So not just in anybody when it comes to the FCS ranks that BYU's got in their season opener. They've got a nationally ranked FCS team coming in here, and they'll be upset-minded. But having a guy like LJ Martin out there for BYU will be a major boon to allowing BYU to win this game quite comfortably. I'm also going to be very clear about this. BYU should be able to handle the likes of Southern Illinois with or without LJ Martin. If there is any question, I mean, just any fine tooth, what I'm trying to say, the smallest kernel of doubt about LJ Martin's readiness, sit him out against Southern Illinois. Hold him for the short week you have the following week when you go to SMU on a Friday night. SMU is going to be all kinds of hopped up because it's their first ever Power 5 opponent coming in to their stadium there in Dallas as a Power 5 member themselves. They are going to be ready for BYU, and that's going to be a very, very tough matchup. And if, like I said, if LJ Martin is not even close to 100%, maybe he's like 95, 96, 97% in your mind, I would still sit him against Southern Illinois. He is a competitor, though. He is a young man who is driven to excel on the football field. He is what I have lovingly termed a thoroughbred when it comes to the running back position. Guys like him don't grow on trees. He was a bona fide four-star prospect when BYU flipped him from Stanford out of El Paso in the 2023 recruiting cycle. And he is a guy that BYU needs on the field to have success this season. It's more important to me that LJ Martin is healthy for when BYU officially kicks off Big 12 play against Kansas State than it is any of the non-conference games. I can appreciate the fact that BYU put this out there because I think they're trying to make it very clear that LJ has a legitimate chance of being able to play this upcoming game 1, game 2, game 3, because that was the rumor. Jay Drews reported it. I backed him up on that because it's similar to what I had heard, that he might miss the non-conference slated games. But if he is healed up to a significant degree where BYU's team doctors have signed off on him going through team activities, especially when it comes to 11-on-11 drills in full pads, that's an indication that he's healing faster than many might have expected. And that is a major, major boost for BYU's odds and chances this season in the Big 12 Conference. I really like what BYU has at running back, quite honestly. I like Hinckley Ropati as the change of pace back, kind of the Robin to LJ's Batman. You also have guys like Miles Davis as well as Pokai Haunga in reserve role. And one other name I'll just pass along to you guys if you want to get to know a name that you can impress your friends if he does break out at some point this season. I'm not saying it's going to happen right away, but Sione Moa. Now, there are 2 Sione Moas on BYU's roster. One wears the number 41. He is a linebacker. He's the son of former former Utah standout Ben Moa. His brother is Ice Moa or Isaiah Moa, who plays a linebacker as well. But then there is a Sione Moa, who's a former Timpview Thunderbird prospect coming to BYU by way of a walk-on addition to the roster. But he has shown some flashes of being a very, very capable back, takes care of the football, and has showed some nice bursts when it comes to a reserve role. So I think BYU, I know there was a lot of angst about BYU not picking up a transfer portal quarterback, especially in light of the questions about LJ's health. But A, if LJ Martin is fully healthy and ready to go, that's awesome. B, with him in the lineup, I look at BYU's stable of running backs and say, okay, that's a strength for BYU. They need the offensive line. LJ and everybody else in that backfield needs the offensive line in front of them to open up holes and obviously to help them have success in terms of setting up their blocks and everything else. So long as that progression continues, and what I hear out of practice is that BYU's offensive line is absolutely intent on proving that last year was an aberration versus the norm for them going forward. And they get back to being the type of offensive line we got used to seeing in the 2020, 2021, 2022 years. That could go a long way to BYU having a much more potent offense, even if a quarterback doesn't necessarily come to the forefront, whether it's Jake Retzloff or Gary Bohannon, and become one of the star quarterbacks who's capable of going for 3,500 or 4,000 yards. If you have a running back tandem in the case of a guy like LJ Martin and Hinckley Ropati that can reel off, let's say, 1,500 yards between the two of them this season, that'd be a major boost to BYU's prospects. And I, for one, was actually quite happy to see LJ Martin participating in full team drills because that is a very, very positive sign and a major boost for BYU's Big 12 hopes this season. All right, coming up here in just a minute, we're going to flip over and talk BYU tight ends with tight ends coach Kevin Gilbride. Had a great chat with him about what he expects from a unit that Aaron Roderick has said himself will travel at least 6 and maybe as many as 8 guys on their travel squad. What do you do with 8 tight ends in a travel squad, 8 guys on a depth chart at tight end? Well, Kevin Gilbride will try to help us make heads and tails of that coming up next, right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Now, Game Time is here for you guys to get you out to whatever events you happen to be going to. A lot of times during the summer months, I know school's starting up here, but a lot of you may be making travels around the country to go watch Major League Baseball games. The good news for you with our friends over at Game Time is they are an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting your tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. Think about that. Saving money the closer it gets to the start of these games. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying your MLB tickets, and they want to help you guys out today. The best part is they've got incredible last-minute deals, so up to 60% off buying last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and other tickets available on the Game Time app. The best part is all-in price, and you toggle that feature, shows you exactly what it's going to cost you in terms of the overall fees to get in the door to whatever event you're going to. So take the guesswork out of buying your MLB tickets or really any other tickets with our friends at Game Time today. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Once again, Terms apply. Create an account and redeem the promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's Locked On College for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Would encourage you guys to make sure you make your second listen today. Our friends over the Locked On College Football Podcast, my good friend Spencer McLaughlin is the host over there. He's getting ready for an exciting season ahead, a discussion on the upcoming season, the ever-changing landscape of college athletics, all kinds of stuff when it comes to conference realignment, transfer portal news, NIL, the new 12-team college football playoff. It's all covered for you guys daily on the Locked On College Football Podcast. It is available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast, and is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. All right, let's talk BYU tight ends. I had a great chat last week during BYU Photo Day with BYU tight ends coach Kevin Gilbride. He comes to BYU chiefly from his time in the NFL ranks. He's coached tight ends, he's coached wide receivers. He's done a little bit of everything in his coaching career, and the best part is he can claim he's a BYU alumnus. Yes, he spent his freshman season at BYU before transferring to Hawaii as a quarterback, but he's had a long and distinguished career, particularly in the pro ranks. He brings that expertise to BYU, and this is a tight end unit. You look at guys like Keanu Hill, Ethan Erickson, Ryner, Swanson, on down the list. I just can't imagine how many guys it's going to take for BYU to get reps to have them feel comfortable, if that makes sense. That's the biggest thing. Is Aaron Roderick said they're going to travel 6 tight ends at least, and maybe as many as 8. How do you get that many guys on the field in any given formation? Well, that's a great question for a guy like Kevin Gilbride. So without further ado, here's my conversation with BYU tight ends coach Kevin Gilbride.
First things first, I wanted to ask you, in terms of just overall feeling going into each training camp, I know you spent time in the NFL, but now in the college realm, how different is it?
It's not very different at all, to be honest with you. Everywhere you go, I would say the schedule's different.
Okay.
So you always have to adapt. You always have to find ways to make sure that you're trying to maximize your time and be the most efficient you can be as far as teaching your guys and getting them to perform.
Your tight end units, and we talked to Aaron Roderick about this. He said you're going to travel 6, maybe as many as 8 tight ends in that travel squad. What is, I guess, the benefit and the downside of that?
I would say there is no downside.
Okay, fair enough.
But that's me as being their position coach. No, I mean, I'd like all my guys to be able to play and perform at a high level. So I don't see it as a downside. Where I do think it's a benefit is the versatility that you can have, whether it's the bigger bodies running down on special teams or protecting on special teams, to being able to get into 13 personnel, which is 3 tight ends, 1 receiver and a back, or and being very versatile from there, being able to align an empty, align in 2 backs, everyone's hand in the dirt, all those different things. But when you do that, you put a lot of strain and stress on the defense. And so that's a big time benefit when you have guys that can perform at a high level and take advantage of the defense that way.
Now, I did joke with Aaron about that. So I'm going to see 14 personnel, and he chuckled at me and said, "You'll have to wait and see."
Yeah, that's it. You could. Who knows?
Okay, fair enough. Keanu Hill made the transition to tight end in the spring. How's he look now versus what you saw in March?
He just continues to progress and get better and better. He's still not where he needs to be yet, but that's okay because he continues to grow and get better because of his mindset and because he's willing to put himself into places where he's going to fail. And he knows that in the game I'm going to have to be able to execute this block. So I better put myself into that position over and over and over until my body understands how to get it done. When you have that mindset, it's a growth mindset. And that could take you, far in life, number one, but definitely on the football field as well. And he has that right now. So as long as he maintains that mindset, we're going to be ready to go come season time.
Now, a lot of people wonder, can he block as a tight end? Your thought?
That's really what I'm referring to, is his blocking, because he's learning how to do it from with a guy that's right here at the line of scrimmage.
As a wide receiver, you have guys 3 or 4 yards off.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Right, and the detail with the footwork that takes, and the having both cleats on the ground as you're striking, all those different things that are vital in order to put your body in good position to just execute versus a guy who's bigger than you. Because oftentimes the tight ends, the defensive ends are bigger than us.
Yeah.
And that's just how it goes. So you better be technique sound. So he's progressing and getting a lot better in that area. But again, that's where the growth still has to happen.
Now, I had a chat with Ryner, and I think his mentality belies his age. He's 17 years old, and I was just stunned at how mature he felt like he was. He he's got a very mature body as well for a 17-year-old. How does he factor into all of this right now?
His physical skill set, being able to run the way that he runs with his size and and catch ability and catch radius, that's where he factors. Okay. He also is having to progress in the run game. Just that transition from high school to college is huge, and then really he played more receiver than he did in tight end in high school. So that's been a progression as well.
Well, he talked about it. He said, I played more of an air raid system. I'm having to learn to play inline tight end and everything. And I was talking with Fessy, and he talked about the fact every one of his wide receivers had to learn every position, be able to play all those positions. I know that your tight end positions, you have Y, you have H, you have different looks. Do you have that same mentality with all of them?
There's 100% we do, to the point where we learn conceptually. Okay. And then it's all based on, if I'm on the front side, back side, and my number one receiver, and my number two, they all have to learn every position, every skill position.
Mata'ava Ta'ase was a guy last year, and I remember he came into fall camp, and Aaron talked about it. He came in as a 8-string walk-on tight end transfer from Southern Utah and vaulted all the way to second string. What can he still do in this offense in your mind?
I mean, he can still do a lot. He's a versatile guy as well. Where he really is helps us a lot is in the run game. But when you do that, when you're productive, say on the front side of a zone scheme, then there's a lot we can do off of it that to get him the football, get the ball in his hands. That people aren't necessarily expecting us to do because he's labeled quote unquote as a blocking tight end. Okay. So what we found is he can do a lot more than that.
Jackson Bowers was a guy that came in with a lot of expectation last year. He was kind of similar to Ryner last year as a true freshman. Got some injuries, obviously never really lived up to what people expected of him. How does he look this year in your eyes?
Well, he's still coming back from an injury.
Okay, so he's still working his way back.
He is, but he's doing well with it. He's he hasn't had any setbacks and is right on track, or maybe even a little bit ahead of schedule. So we're happy with that. Mm-hmm. And what I've enjoyed and appreciated about him was I challenged him to really stay locked in and get the mental reps, so that when he does come back, he's ready to go. He's done that. So and his mindset is a good one right now. So I think he'll maintain it and come when he's truly ready to go full speed, he'll be ready to go as well.
You were a guy who played here for a year before you ultimately transferred and went over to Hawaii, and we talked with you in the spring about being back at BYU. Now that you've got some extra time, does it feel like the old times? Like, what does it feel like?
Yes and no.
Okay.
It's a totally different capacity that I'm in, rather coaching these guys rather than being an 18-year-old player on the team. Yeah. But it really has been great. Like, there's been no complaints, and the biggest thing for me is making sure that my family's comfortable, and my wife and my daughter moved out here in mid-March, and they've settled in great and are enjoying the people and the place a lot. So that's important, and then now I can be happy with the rest of it, which is coaching and working here with great people who I really enjoy being around. I think are all pulling in the same direction as far as what we're trying to get accomplished here.
Now, obviously going into your first season coaching in the Big 12 here, what are you looking forward to? What do you expect?
Just to be totally honest, I don't go in with many expectations. Okay. What I look for is I look for our guys to get them to perform. Like, that's what I expect. Okay. So as far as going to big stadiums, or we're going to get this amount of wins or anything like that, that's really not me at all. I'm very much a process-oriented guy. Okay. So I do live in the moment because I think if I live anywhere else, I'm not going to get the most out of my guys. So that's my thought process. Okay,
I'm going to use a phrase from sports. Sure. Trust the process. Is that it?
Trust the process.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, Coach, thanks for the time.
You're welcome.
There you go, Kevin Gilbride, BYU tight ends coach. A big thank you to him for taking the time to talk with me. I always enjoy my chats with him because he's a very interesting character, because he comes from the professional ranks, as I mentioned, working in the NFL, but he's a guy who you can tell is happy to be at BYU, working with guys that he was once teammates with and has a really unique relationship with. The coaching circles out there, the coaching fraternity, as they like to call it, it's not very big. And once you're connected with certain guys, you go forward in your careers and things have a way of just coming back around. So cool to see Kevin Gilbride back at BYU all these years later. And the good news is it sounds like he is upbeat about the potential of his tight ends unit, but he's also very quick to say that they all need to continue to show improvement. And I can understand that. He's not going to be satisfied with where things are at with this tight end unit. It's a tight end unit that quite literally had kind of stalled out in its progress this last couple of seasons. Remember, it was really kind of Isaac Rex and the who's who of other guys at tight end that really didn't contribute to any meaningful degree outside of Mason Wake. That goes back now 3 seasons for Mason Wake. So getting more production from the tight end unit as a whole, that is absolutely critical for BYU. And the hope is they will demand the ball and they'll become a force for the BYU offense this fall. And that'd be a welcome development, similar to what we just talked about earlier with the running back boost, getting with LJ Martin back into the fold. So big thank you once again to Coach Gilbride. And we're looking forward to seeing what BYU's tight ends can do as they move forward here in training camp and on in to the 2024 football season. All right, we're going to finish up today's show. Coming up next, this one hits very close to home to me, but we lost a true blue hero. I'm going to pay tribute to a guy that I'm not sure I'm going to make it through it, but we're going to talk about that next as we continue right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first view and or listen of the day. Appreciate all of your guys' support. If you have not done so already, please sign up for Locked On Cougars Insider Group. It's where I'm sending out most of my insider intel that I got on the BYU football program. So if you want to know what I'm hearing about BYU, well, join us today. The link is in the show notes below, whether you're watching this and or listening to it, wherever you get the podcast. Click the link in the show notes below. Join us. You get a 14-day free trial, just $5 a month afterwards to have that insider access. And the best part is those updates come to your phone in the form of a text message. Think about that. It does not get much simpler than that to have them come to you directly to your mobile device in a text message form. So join us today on the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. All right. I talked a while back, this goes back probably 2 or 3 weeks, about my grandfather. Now, those of you who are everydayers, remember I broke down a little bit talking about some, let's just say, unwelcome news with regards to his health. My grandfather passed away yesterday at the age of 90. And wow, it's already, I'm already breaking down. Man, gotta talk on a podcast. The biggest thing is my grandfather was one of my heroes. I'm gonna be straight up with you guys. I'm gonna miss him. I've said it before, I'll say it again. If you guys want a reason why I do what I do in sports media, you want the person to blame for me being as big of a BYU proponent and fan as I was growing up and now as a media member covering the Cougars on a professional basis, look at my grandfather, Herman Kent Hatch. He made it to 90 and a half years old. He golfed last month in the month of July at age 90. And my last conversation with him, we were talking BYU sports. We talked some Utah Jazz. He and I talked just literally every sport under the sun. But obviously, the bulk of our conversations about sports came down to 2 things: BYU football in particular, but basketball as well, and golf. I got the news as I was headed out. I have a weekly round in a men's league in Orem, Utah at Sleepy Ridge Golf Course. I'm actually wearing a Black Desert hat today. That golf course down in Ivins, the new PGA Tour venue in southern Utah. But that's beside the point. I got the news as I was headed down to the golf course yesterday about the passing of my grandfather. And there's some thought in my head that, you know what, maybe I shouldn't go golf today. Maybe I should go spend time with my family. But then I had just a thought pop in my head. You know what? The place you spent the most time, quite literally, and I spent a lot of time with my grandfather. I'll be very upfront about that. But the most time I spent with him, quite literally, was on the golf course. And you know what? We're going to go honor him. We're going to go play around in his honor. And had a great time. It allowed me to kind of process some of my emotions out there on the course. Those of you who are golfers, I think can understand that. It's a way the sport, it causes you to think, causes you to reflect on stuff. And I was just, it's kind of hit me that I was lucky. It's really lucky to have a grandfather like him. Took me to my very first BYU game that I can remember going to. The history says that my first ever BYU football game was August, whatever it was, 1996 against Texas A&M. Remember that famed 14-1 BYU team in 1996. My grandpa and I remember sitting in his Isuzu Trooper at the time, driving down there, parking in the parking lot, going in, sitting in the west stands, and my love affair with BYU sports really began that day. And to his everlasting credit, my grandpa did everything within his power to make sure that I had opportunities and
to go and watch the Cougars as much as I could. Spent many an afternoon and an evening with him watching BYU games on his big screen TV in Orem, or at those games down there at Lavelle Edwards Stadium, then Cougar Stadium back in the 90s. And I'm going to remember those for the rest of my life. And the other thing is, in an ironic way, I'm a little bit upset. He was a true everydayer. He loved to talk to his friends that in his retirement community about the fact that his grandson talked BYU sports and it came to him on his phone every single day and he didn't have to do anything other than push play on his phone. He was a BYU guy through and through. He was an optometrist in Provo. I don't mean to blubber through all of this, but bear with me. He was an optometrist in Provo with 4 other partners. Those of you know the optometry clinic he worked at. It was a stone's throw away from what is now Utah Valley Medical Center. They actually absorbed the land that it was on. It turned into XLI Center, I think, at one point after he retired and sold out his portion of the partnership he had. But the thing is, he was BYU's unofficial team optometrist for quite literally years. I'm talking about BYU athletics. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of BYU players, coaches, administrators, university professors, university administration that saw my grandfather when they came to have their eyes checked. And he had some really, really cool stories about his experiences going to BYU events. Chief among them, this goes way back. Those who remember Kresimir Chosic, obviously the great BYU basketball legend. There was a game that my dad and my grandfather were sitting in the stands at the Marriott Center. This goes obviously back to the 70s when Chosic was playing for BYU. And my grandfather got essentially people down on the sideline were kind of motioning at him like, hey, we need you to come down here. So my dad and my grandfather kind of hustled down to courtside and say, hey, Chosic has got an issue. We need you to go back into the locker room and help him out. My grandfather went back there, and this is in the era when you had contact lenses. They were actual glass. It's how far back in history it was. Well, one of the contact lenses that Chosic was wearing that night had gotten stuck on the back of his eyeball. Now, I'm very lucky in that I've had quite literally zero vision issues my entire life. Never had to have corrective lenses, contacts or like. I've had 2015 vision almost my entire life. But my grandfather spent a significant portion, I think it was like halftime, if I remember the story right, spent a significant portion of that halftime essentially trying to fish that contact lens from the back of Josic's eyeball to get it out, because it obviously is irritating, and you can't really play when you know you got a piece of glass kind of on the backside of your eyeball. It sounds horrible to me. That's just one story of, it feels like hundreds I heard from him about meeting with other BYU players and coaches and helping them out. Some of you watching and or listening to this podcast very well may have visited my grandfather. He worked, I think is famously, my dad always said that he started his day around like 7 a.m. and had 10-minute appointments until like 6 p.m. at night. And he just saw so many people. And if any of you were lucky enough to have associated or known or even just were treated by my grandfather, it's a really, really cool thing to consider that he was my grandfather. Grew up on a small, well, not really small, but he grew up in a small town in Idaho, Bancroft, Idaho. If those of you know where Bancroft is at, props to you, because it is a stone's throw from seemingly nowhere. Chesterfield is the closest city to it. Lava Hot Springs is in the vicinity. And he grew up on a dairy farm and realized that, you know what, I don't want this. I don't want to be a dairy farmer the rest of my life. And he ended up becoming an optometrist and moved to Provo, Utah after graduating optometry school and working out of state for a little while, and then moved to Orem, where they settled. And I can take you right to the house my grandparents lived for years. And man, it's a pretty choice childhood to have a grandfather like that. So just wanted to pay homage to him. I know it's not the most compelling information. I know it's not compelling segment to end the podcast on. You don't want to watch or listen to your podcast host here blubber on about his grandfather, but he was a BYU Cougar through and through. We're talking true blue. It was all about BYU. And his whole thing when he knew I was getting into media and doing what I was doing, interning for Gregor Bell all those years ago. Wow, we're going back to 2010. He was one of my champions. Always encouraged me to chase what I have done for my career to this point. And I'm a faithful member of the LDS Church, and I firmly believe I'm going to see my grandfather again. And I cannot wait, because it's a good man right there. Great grandfather, a great father, a great grandfather to my kids, and man, I was blessed. So thank you. Thank you to those of you who bore with me through this. But rest in peace, Grandpa. Love you, miss you, and we'll see you again soon. And we'll catch up then. We'll play another round of golf. We'll talk. Who knows? We'll talk life. We'll talk sports. But we will catch up down the road and on the other side. But that's going to do it. Thank you for your guys' support of the podcast. It really does mean the world to me. It's a chance for me to share insights into what I love, and that's BYU sports, but also share insights into my personal life as well. So I felt like, you know what? Grandfather passed away, and he's maybe the biggest BYU fan that I quite literally have ever known in my entire life. We're going to pay homage to him. And yeah, so thank you. Thank you for all of your support of the podcast. Thank you for making it your first view and or listen of the day. Take your loved ones, hug them tight, and tell them you love them. You never know when it's going to be taken away from you. I had some time to get ready for my grandfather to pass, but even when I got the news that he had passed, still was a shock to the system. So appreciate all the support. Thank you for being everydayers with us here. And I'm going to sign off now and just say this. We love you, Grandpa, and we will talk to you guys again soon on our next edition of Locked On Cougars.